Princess Zarathel stood at the observation deck of the massive orbital station, watching another suitor's ship depart in what could only be described as a furious exit. The Krillian vessel spun aggressively as it pulled away from the docking bay, its pilot clearly expressing his displeasure through unnecessarily dramatic maneuvers. She counted the ships in her head that made 47 rejections in the past 3 standard months. The Nexari princess was considered the most eligible woman in 3 galaxy sectors, heir to a star empire that controlled 17 star systems and commanded trade routes worth trillions of credits. Her scales shimmered with an opalescent quality that marked her as true royal bloodline, and her 4 arms moved with the graceful precision that came from centuries of breeding for perfection. By all accounts, she should have been married years ago. "Your Highness," came the familiar voice of Chancellor Vextar behind her. The elderly Nexari's breathing apparatus wheezed slightly as he approached. "The Krillian delegation has lodged a formal complaint. They claim you insulted Prince Gorthay K by questioning his understanding of quantum mechanics during the courtship dinner." Zarathel turned, her large golden eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the transparent aluminum windows. "I simply asked him to explain the theoretical implications of faster-than-light communication on causality. When he suggested that messages could be sent backward in time to warn ancestors of danger, I felt it necessary to provide correction. You made him look foolish in front of his entire retinue." "He made himself look foolish. I merely pointed out the scientific inaccuracy of his statement." She gestured with 2 of her arms toward the departing ship. "If he cannot engage in basic scientific discourse, how could he possibly be expected to rule alongside me? The Nexari Empire spans multiple star systems. Our leaders must understand the fundamental forces that govern interstellar travel and communication." Chancellor Vextar's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Your Highness, with respect, not every potential suitor needs to be a theoretical physicist. Prince Gorthay K commands a fleet of 200 warships and controls mining rights to 7 asteroid belts rich in rare elements. His military prowess and economic power would strengthen our empire considerably, and his complete lack of intellectual curiosity would weaken it just as considerably." Zarathel moved away from the window, her silk robes flowing behind her as she walked toward the central console. "Tell me, Chancellor, what news from the Terran delegation?" "The humans?" Vextar seemed surprised by the change of subject. "They remain in their assigned quarters. Quite unremarkable, really. Their representative has barely spoken since arriving. Most peculiar behavior for a diplomatic mission." Zarathel accessed the station's monitoring systems, pulling up feeds from various sections. The human delegation consisted of only 3 individuals, a remarkably small group compared to the elaborate entourages that typically accompanied other suitors. Most alien dignitaries traveled with dozens of advisors, guards, servants, and protocol officers. The humans had arrived in a modest vessel with minimal fanfare. "Show me their quarters," she requested. The holographic display materialized above the console, revealing the human delegation's living area. 2 of the humans appeared to be engaged in some form of strategy game, moving pieces across a checkered board with intense concentration. The 3rd human sat apart from the others, reading from a small electronic device. "Which one is the suitor?" she asked. "The silent one. Dr. Marcus Chun. According to their documentation, he holds advanced degrees in xenobiology, quantum physics, and diplomatic relations. The other 2 are Dr. Sarah Williams, a linguistic specialist, and Commander James Rodriguez, their military attaché." Zarathel studied the image of Dr. Chun. Unlike the elaborate costumes and ceremonial armor worn by other suitors, he was dressed in simple, practical clothing. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture suggested someone comfortable with solitude. Most intriguingly, he had made no attempt to request an audience with her, despite being on the station for 5 standard days. "Has he submitted a formal courtship proposal?" "No, Your Highness. In fact, he has made no requests whatsoever." His companions handle all necessary communications with our staff. Dr. Chun himself has spoken fewer than 20 words since their arrival, and those were responses to direct questions from our protocol officers. This was unprecedented. Every other suitor had immediately upon arrival demanded audiences, sent elaborate gifts, composed lengthy poems in her honor, or demonstrated their worthiness through various displays of strength, wealth, or political power. The Zephyrian prince had actually challenged 3 other suitors to ritual combat within hours of docking. The crystalline ambassador had presented her with a moon-sized diamond carved with her likeness. The void swimmers had performed an elaborate courtship dance in zero gravity that lasted for 6 hours. But the human simply read his books and said nothing. Perhaps he is ill, she suggested. Some species require specific atmospheric conditions or nutritional supplements when away from their homeworlds. Our medical scans indicate he is in perfect health. Dr. Williams confirmed that he requires no special accommodations. He simply appears to be. Vextar paused, searching for the right word, observing. Observing what? Unknown, Your Highness. Our monitoring indicates he spends considerable time studying technical manuals related to our station systems, reviewing historical documents about Nexary culture, and analyzing economic data from our trade networks. Most curious behavior for someone supposedly here to court you. Zarathel found herself intrigued despite her best efforts to remain detached. In her experience, beings who sought her hand in marriage fell into predictable categories. There were those who wanted her for political advantage, seeing marriage as a pathway to influence over the Nexary Empire. Others were attracted to her royal status and the prestige that would come from marrying into the oldest noble bloodline in 3 sectors. A few seemed genuinely interested in her personally, though their interest rarely survived her tendency toward intellectual discourse and her refusal to be impressed by displays of machismo or wealth. But a suitor who showed no interest in meeting her at all? This was entirely new. I want to observe him, she announced. Your Highness, arrange for me to monitor his activities discreetly. If he is studying us, perhaps I should study him in return. Over the following days, Zarathel found herself spending more and more time watching the human delegation. Dr. Chin's routine was remarkably consistent. He woke at precisely the same time each morning, performed what appeared to be physical exercises, consumed a simple meal, and then spent the remainder of the day reading. His reading material was diverse and sophisticated, everything from Nexary poetry to engineering specifications for fusion reactors. What struck her most was his complete lack of interest in the dramatic events unfolding around him. When Prince Mordek of the Shadow Realms arrived with a fleet of 50 black ships and proceeded to serenade her over the public communication channel for 4 hours straight, Dr. Chun simply put on audio-dampening headphones and continued reading. When the Quantum Lords engaged in a spectacular light show demonstration that lit up half the star system, he glanced out the window briefly, made a note in a small journal, and returned to his studies. He is documenting our courtship customs, she realized during one observation session. Chancellor Vextar had joined her in the monitoring room, equally fascinated by the human's behavior. What do you mean? Look at his notes. She enhanced the visual feed, focusing on the journal Dr. Chun wrote in each evening. While the text was in a human language she could not read, his sketches were clear enough. He had drawn detailed illustrations of each suitor's arrival, their ships, their ceremonial dress, and their courtship displays. He is an anthropologist, she continued, the pieces falling into place. He is not here to court me at all. He is here to study courtship rituals as practiced by different species. This revelation should have been insulting. Instead, Zarathel found it refreshing. For the first time in months, someone had visited their station without wanting something from her personally. Dr. Chun was interested in her culture, not her crown. Shall I have him removed? Vextar asked. If he is here under false pretenses. No. The response came more quickly than she had intended. Leave him be. In fact, I think it might be time for a formal introduction. Your Highness, if he is not actually a suitor, then perhaps he should be. The next morning, Zarathel made her way to the human delegation's quarters. She had dismissed her usual retinue of guards and advisors, choosing instead to go alone. The station's corridors were familiar to her, but she found herself noticing details she had previously overlooked. The way the artificial gravity generators created subtle vibrations in the deck plating, the efficiency of the air circulation systems, the elegant mathematics behind the station's rotating sections. Was this how Dr. Chen saw everything? Not as symbols of power and prestige, but as fascinating examples of applied science and engineering? She arrived at the human quarters and activated the door chime. Dr. Williams answered, her eyes widening in surprise at seeing the princess standing unannounced in the corridor. Your Highness, we were not expecting. We had no appointment scheduled. Please come in. The human quarters were sparse, but comfortable. Dr. Rodriguez stood immediately upon her entrance, snapping into what she recognized as a military posture of respect. Dr. Chen looked up from his reading, but remained seated, regarding her with calm, intelligent eyes. Dr. Chen, she said, approaching him directly, I understand you have been studying our customs. I have, he replied simply. His voice was pleasant, unaccented in the universal translator's rendering. Your culture's approach to formal courtship rituals demonstrates fascinating variations from standard anthropological models. And what conclusions have you drawn? That most of your suitors fundamentally misunderstand what they are attempting to accomplish. The blunt assessment caught her off guard. Explain. Dr. Chun closed his book and gave her his full attention. Courtship, at its core, is about demonstrating compatibility. Most of the individuals who have visited here have focused on displaying their own strengths, rather than establishing whether those strengths complement yours. They perform for you as if you were an audience, rather than engaging with you as if you were a partner. And what would you do differently? I would begin by trying to understand what you actually want in a partner, rather than assuming I already know. The simple logic of this statement was simultaneously obvious and revolutionary. In all her interactions with potential suitors, not one had ever asked her what she was looking for in a husband. They had all assumed they knew what would impress her: wealth, power, military might, physical prowess, or exotic gifts. What do I want in a partner? She asked, curious to hear his perspective. I have no idea, he admitted. But I suspect it has very little to do with the size of someone's fleet or their ability to perform ritual combat. For the first time in months, Princess Zarathel found herself genuinely smiling. Dr. Marcus Chen's question hung in the air like a challenge. Princess Zarathel realized that in all her years of dealing with suitors, no one had ever asked her what she actually wanted. The simplicity of the inquiry made her previous interactions seem almost absurd in comparison. That is a more complex question than you might realize, she said, settling into one of the chairs across from him. Dr. Williams and Commander Rodriguez exchanged glances, clearly uncertain whether they should remain or excuse themselves. Please stay, Zarathel said, noting their hesitation. Dr. Williams, I understand you specialize in linguistics. I would be curious to hear your observations about the communication patterns you have witnessed during your time here. Dr. Williams blinked in surprise. Well, Your Highness, most of the diplomatic exchanges have been quite formal, very structured, following what appear to be traditional protocols. But the actual information exchange has been remarkably limited. Most conversations seem designed to impress rather than inform. Exactly. Zarathel turned back to Dr. Chen. You asked what I want in a partner. The honest answer is that I want someone who can think. Someone who understands that ruling an interstellar empire requires more than the ability to command fleets or intimidate opponents. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. What are the primary challenges facing the Nexari Empire currently? Another question no suitor had ever asked. Zarathel found herself leaning forward, energized by the opportunity to discuss substance rather than ceremony. Resource distribution, she began. We control 17 star systems, but The transportation costs for moving raw materials between distant worlds are becoming economically unsustainable. We need more efficient shipping routes or revolutionary transportation technology. Have you considered the Alcubierre drive modifications proposed by the Centauri Institute? Dr. Chen asked. Their latest papers suggest a 30% efficiency improvement over current faster-than-light systems. Zarathel stared at him. You have read the Centauri papers? I found them in your public research database. Fascinating work, though I noticed some potential issues with their mathematical assumptions regarding space-time compression ratios. The exotic matter requirements, she said immediately. They underestimate the energy costs by at least 15%. Closer to 18% by my calculations, Dr. Chun agreed. But their basic approach is sound. With some refinements, it could revolutionize interstellar commerce. For the next 2 hours, Princess Zarathel found herself engaged in the most intellectually stimulating conversation she had experienced in years. Dr. Chun was remarkably well-informed about a stunning variety of subjects. He understood the economic principles governing interstellar trade, the political complexities of managing diverse planetary populations, and the technological challenges of maintaining infrastructure across such vast distances. More importantly, he listened. When she explained the difficulties of mediating disputes between species with completely different psychological frameworks, he asked thoughtful follow-up questions rather than immediately offering solutions. When she described the challenges of maintaining cultural identity while encouraging innovation, he shared relevant examples from human history without suggesting that human approaches were necessarily superior. Your species has dealt with similar issues, she observed, managing diverse populations with different values and customs. Many times throughout our history, Dr. Chun confirmed. Not always successfully. We have learned, often the hard way, that effective governance requires understanding and respecting differences rather than trying to eliminate them. The Krillians believe that strength comes from uniformity, she said. They argue that the most efficient empire would have all subjects following identical customs and laws. The Krillians have never successfully maintained control over more than 3-star systems. Commander Rodriguez interjected. Their approach creates resistance rather than cooperation. Exactly, Zarathel said. But convincing my father's council of that has proven challenging. Many of our advisors believe that human diplomatic methods are too soft, too accommodating. What do you believe? Dr. Chen asked. I believe that an empire held together by fear will eventually collapse from within. But I also believe that pure accommodation without any enforcement mechanisms invites chaos. She paused, considering her words carefully. I think the optimal approach lies somewhere between those extremes. A system that maintains core principles while allowing for local variation in implementation. Federalism, Dr. Williams said. That is essentially how the Terran colonial authority manages its outer settlements. How effective has that proven? More effective than any of us expected, Commander Rodriguez admitted. We worried that giving local governors too much autonomy would lead to fragmentation, but the opposite has occurred. The colonies are more loyal to Earth now than they were under direct central control. Because they feel heard, Dr. Chen added. When people believe their concerns matter to their government, they are more willing to support that government, even when specific decisions do not favor them. Zarathel felt a growing excitement as the implications became clear. You could help us implement such a system. I could advise, Dr. Chun corrected gently. But ultimately, any governmental reforms would need to come from Annexuary themselves. Imposed solutions rarely work, even when they are objectively superior. Another lesson from human experience? From everyone's experience. The Vegan Republic, the Andromedan Collective, the Crystal Hegemony, they all tried to export their governmental systems to conquered territories. None of those imposed systems survived more than a generation. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chancellor Vextar, who appeared in the doorway, looking distinctly agitated. Your Highness, your presence is required immediately. The Draconic Consortium has arrived, and Prince Flameheart demands an immediate audience. He claims insult at being kept waiting while you, socialize with lesser beings. The last phrase was delivered with obvious distaste, and Zarathel saw Dr. Chen's expression harden almost imperceptibly. "Tell Prince Flameheart that I will see him at the scheduled time," she said calmly. "Not before. Your Highness, the Draconic military escort includes 12 battle cruisers. They are not accustomed to being denied. Then perhaps it is time they learn new customs." She rose from her chair, her 4 arms moving in the graceful gesture that indicated royal decree. "Dr. Chun, I would very much like to continue our conversation. Would you and your colleagues join me for dinner this evening?" "We would be honored, Your Highness." "Excellent. And please, when we are in private conversation, call me Zara." Chancellor Vexstar's breathing apparatus wheezed with alarm. "Your Highness, such informality with foreign nationals could be seen as treating intelligent beings with basic respect," she finished. "I will see Prince Flameheart in 3 hours, as originally scheduled. Until then, I am not to be disturbed unless the station is under direct attack." The dinner that evening was unlike any diplomatic function Zarathel had ever attended. Rather than the formal, ritualistic exchanges typical of such events, the conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. Dr. Williams shared fascinating insights about linguistic evolution and how different species' communication methods reflected their underlying psychology. Commander Rodriguez discussed military strategy with a sophistication that impressed even Zarathel's tactical advisors. And Dr. Chun continued to ask the kinds of thoughtful questions that challenged her to articulate ideas she had never fully examined. "What do you want your legacy to be?" he asked during dessert. "My legacy? 100 years from now, when historians write about your reign, what would you want them to say about how you changed the Nexari Empire?" It was a question that went to the heart of everything she had been thinking about. "I wanted to say that I made the Empire stronger by making it more just. That I found ways to maintain unity without sacrificing the diversity that makes us strong. That is a worthy goal," Dr. Chen said, "and achievable with the right approach." "You really believe that?" "I believe that the most sustainable power structures are those based on mutual benefit rather than simple dominance. The Nexari Empire has resources and technology that benefit everyone within it, but only if those benefits are shared fairly." Later that evening, after the human delegation had returned to their quarters, Zarathel found herself in her private chambers, thinking about the day's conversations. For the first time in months, she felt energized about the future rather than simply resigned to her obligations. Her communication console chimed with an incoming message from her father, Emperor Karathel, transmitting from the capital world. "Daughter," his image materialized in holographic form. "I have received reports about your interactions with the human delegation. Vextar suggests you are spending an inappropriate amount of time with them." "I am learning, Father. The humans have insights that could benefit our empire significantly. They're a minor species from a single star system. What could they possibly teach us that we have not already learned from our traditional allies? Different perspectives lead to better solutions. The humans have experience with exactly the kinds of challenges we are facing. Managing diversity, maintaining stability across vast distances, balancing local autonomy with central authority." Emperor Korathel's expression suggested skepticism, and their representative has formally requested your hand in marriage. "Not exactly." "Not exactly?" "Either he has or he has not." Zarathel hesitated. The truth was that Dr. Chun had shown no romantic interest in her whatsoever. Their interactions had been entirely intellectual and professional. Yet she found herself more drawn to him than to any of the princes and nobles who had pursued her with obvious romantic intent. "He is different from the others," she said finally. "Different how?" "He treats me as if my thoughts matter more than my title." Her father's expression softened slightly. "Your happiness is important to me, Zara, but your responsibilities to our people matter more. Marriage is a political tool for someone in your position. Romance is a luxury we cannot afford. What if I could find both? What if I could find someone who would be both a good partner personally and politically?" From a species that controls only one star system. From a species that has successfully navigated exactly the challenges that threaten our empire's future stability. Emperor Karathel was quiet for a long moment. The Draconic Prince has made a formal proposal. 12-star systems, including control over 3 major trade routes. It would be an excellent strategic alliance. Prince Flameheart believes that the proper response to dissent is obliteration. His idea of diplomacy is deciding whether to destroy opponents quickly or slowly. Sometimes such approaches are necessary. They are never necessary, Father. They are simply easier than finding real solutions. After the conversation ended, Zarathel stood at her window, looking out at the stars that marked the boundaries of her future empire. Somewhere among those lights was Earth, the small blue world that had produced Dr. Marcus Chun and his radically sensible approach to complex problems. She made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. The next morning brought news that would test every principle Zarathel had been discussing with Dr. Chun. A rebellion had erupted in the Outer Rim territories, specifically in the Kethmoran system. 3 planetary governors had declared independence from the Nexari Empire, citing excessive taxation and lack of representation in imperial policy decisions. Flameheart's fleet is already moving to intercept, Chancellor Vextar reported during the Emergency Council session. He requests permission to demonstrate draconic resolve through immediate military action. The holographic display showed the tactical situation. 12 draconic battle cruisers were indeed positioning themselves at the edge of the Kethmoran system, their weapons charged and ready. Prince Flameheart's solution to the rebellion was characteristically direct. Destroy the rebel leadership, occupy the planets with military force, and impose martial law until order was restored. Estimated civilian casualties? Zarathel asked. Prince Flameheart considers such calculations irrelevant. Vextar replied diplomatically. He argues that a swift, decisive response will prevent similar uprisings in other systems. In other words, he intends to rule through terror. He intends to preserve imperial authority. Zarathel studied the tactical display more carefully. The Kethmoran system contained 3 inhabited worlds with a combined population of nearly 2 billion beings. The majority were Nexari citizens, but significant minorities included Zenthari miners, vegan agricultural specialists, and even a small human research colony studying the system's unique crystalline formations. What are the specific grievances? She asked. The usual complaints, one of the military advisors said dismissively. They claim their tax burden is disproportionate to the services they receive from the Empire. They want local representation in the Imperial Senate. They object to the new mining regulations that prioritize exports over local environmental concerns. Are their complaints valid? The question created an uncomfortable silence in the council chamber. Finally, Vextar spoke carefully. Their tax rate is somewhat higher than the imperial average, but that is due to the cost of maintaining security in the Outer Rim territories. As for representation, they elect planetary governors who report to regional administrators who report to the Imperial Council. The system works adequately. That is not what I asked, Zarathel said firmly. Are there specific complaints factually accurate? More uncomfortable silence. She realized that none of her advisors had actually investigated the rebels' claims. They had simply dismissed them as irrelevant because rebellion was, by definition, impermissible. I want a full analysis of the Kethmoran situation, she announced. Economic data, political structures, environmental impact assessments, demographic studies. Everything. Your Highness, the military advisor protested. While we conduct studies, the rebellion could spread. Decisive action now could prevent a much larger conflict later. Decisive action based on incomplete information could also escalate a manageable situation into an empire-wide crisis. She dismissed the council and immediately contacted Dr. Chen's quarters. When his image appeared on the communication screen, she noticed he appeared to have been awake for some time despite the early hour. Dr. Chun, I have a situation that could benefit from outside perspective. Would you be available for consultation? Of course you're... Zara, what kind of situation? She explained the Kethmoran rebellion, the draconic response, and her own uncertainty about the best course of action. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, asking only occasional clarifying questions. What information do you have about the rebel leadership? He asked when she finished. Very little. They are branded as criminals and traitors in our official reports. May I suggest that your first step should be direct communication with them? Direct communication? Vextar had rejoined the conversation and sounded horrified. Your Highness, one does not negotiate with rebels. It legitimizes their actions and encourages similar behavior elsewhere. One also does not solve problems without understanding them, Dr. Chen replied calmly. If the Kethmoran leaders have legitimate grievances, addressing those grievances might resolve the situation without bloodshed. And if their grievances are not legitimate, Vextar demanded, then you will have demonstrated the superiority of imperial justice through fair consideration rather than brute force. Either outcome strengthens your empire more than simple military suppression. Zarathel found the logic compelling. Arrange a secure communication channel to the Kethmoran leadership. I want to speak with them directly. Your Highness, such action without council approval. I'm not asking for council approval. I am informing you of my decision. 3 hours later, Zarathel found herself in direct communication with Governor Malekith Tar, the leader of the Kethmoran rebellion. The Nexary governor was older than she had expected, his scales dulled with age, but his eyes bright with intelligence. Your Highness, he said, his tone respectful but firm. I admit surprise at your willingness to communicate directly. I'm told you have grievances against imperial policy. I would like to hear them. Where shall I begin? Our system generates 17% of the Empire's exotic metal production, yet we receive only 3% of Imperial infrastructure investment. Our environmental protection requests have been ignored for 12 years, while mining operations strip mine our primary agricultural world. And when we petition for representation in policy decisions that affect our population directly, we're told that local concerns are subordinate to Imperial needs. These are serious accusations, Zarathel said. Do you have documentation supporting these claims? 23 years' worth of financial records, environmental impact studies, and correspondence with Imperial administrators. Dr. Chun, who had been observing the conversation, leaned forward slightly. Governor Kethtar, what specific changes would satisfy your concerns? The governor looked surprised to hear a human voice. Who is asking? Dr. Marcus Chun, representing the Terran Colonial Authority as an observer. I apologize if my presence is unwelcome. Not unwelcome, merely unexpected. Governor Kethtar paused thoughtfully. To answer your question, we seek 3 basic accommodations. First, representation in the Imperial Senate proportional to our economic contribution. Second, environmental protection standards that prevent irreversible damage to our ecosystems. Third, reinvestment of tax revenues in local infrastructure at a rate comparable to core worlds. Reasonable requests, Dr. Chun observed to Zarathel. Treasonous demands, came Prince Flameheart's voice as he forced his way into the communication channel. The Draconic Prince's massive form filled the display, his golden scales gleaming with barely controlled aggression. Governor Kethtar, you will surrender unconditionally within 6 hours, or I will demonstrate why the Draconic Consortium has never lost a military engagement. Prince Flameheart, Zarathel said sharply, you are interrupting a diplomatic conversation. I am preventing the appearance of imperial weakness. Princess, these rebels understand only strength. Show them mercy, and every outer rim system will follow their example. Governor Kethtar's expression hardened, and this is exactly why we declared independence. Imperial policy is dictated by those who see violence as the solution to every problem. Because violence is the solution to every problem, Flameheart roared. Diplomacy is what weak species use when they lack the strength to impose their will. Prince Flameheart, you will withdraw your forces immediately, Zarathel commanded. I will do no such thing. Your father granted me authority to restore order in this system. My father granted you permission to assist Imperial forces. I am countermanding that authorization. You do not have that authority. Dr. Chin spoke quietly to Zarathel. Actually, under Imperial law, you do. The heir apparent has full executive authority in systems not under direct Imperial administration. Keth Moran declared independence, which technically places it outside Imperial administration until the rebellion is resolved. Prince Flameheart's eyes narrowed dangerously. The human advises you poorly, Princess. Military might trumps legal technicalities. Are you threatening to use military force against Imperial authority? Zarathel asked, her voice deadly calm. The implications of that question hung in the digital space between them. If Flameheart proceeded with his attack against direct orders from the Imperial heir, he would be committing an act of war against the Nexary Empire itself. I'm promising to restore order, he said carefully, regardless of who objects. Governor Kethtar, Zarathel said, turning her attention back to the rebel leader, I want to propose a compromise. The Nexary Empire will grant the Keth Moran system full administrative autonomy in exchange for continued membership in the Imperial Trade Network. You would collect your own taxes, maintain your own environmental standards, and elect your own representatives to the Imperial Senate. A dangerous precedent, Vextar warned. A logical evolution, Dr. Chen countered. The Empire maintains the economic benefits of the relationship while reducing administrative costs and eliminating the source of the conflict. Governor Kethtar looked thoughtful. What guarantees would we have that this arrangement would be honored? A formal treaty ratified by the Imperial Senate and incorporated into Imperial law. And if other systems request similar arrangements, then we will evaluate their situations on their individual merits. Good government adapts to circumstances rather than applying universal solutions to unique problems. Prince Flameheart's roar of fury nearly overloaded the communication system. This is intolerable. You reward rebellion and call it diplomacy. I solve problems and call it leadership, Zarathel replied calmly. Governor Kethtar, do you accept these terms? In principle, yes. But I must consult with my fellow governors. Understood. You have 24 hours to provide a final answer. And Prince Flameheart, the governor asked nervously. Prince Flameheart will not interfere with your deliberations, she said, staring directly at the Draconic Prince. Will you, Your Highness? Flameheart's response was to sever his connection to the communication channel. Moments later, long-range sensors detected his fleet moving toward the edge of the Keth Moran system. Not withdrawing, but positioning for attack. He means to force the issue, Vextar observed. If he attacks before Governor Kethtar can respond, the diplomatic option becomes moot. Then, we must ensure that does not happen. How? We have no military assets in the Keth Moran system, and Flameheart commands 12 battle cruisers. Dr. Chun cleared his throat. Actually, there are 3 Terran research vessels in the system. They are not warships, but they could serve as observers. Observers? Independent witnesses to ensure that any military action is properly documented for later review. Pirates and rebels sometimes attack research vessels, but respected military commanders do not. Zarathel smiled. Dr. Chun, would the Terran Colonial Authority be willing to provide such observation services? I believe Commander Rodriguez could arrange that. It would take approximately 6 hours for the ships to reach optimal observation positions. Excellent. Do it. Over the next 18 hours, Zarathel watched a delicate diplomatic dance unfold. The Terran research vessels positioned themselves strategically throughout the Keth Moran system, their sensors recording everything and broadcasting their findings on open channels. Prince Flameheart found himself in the unprecedented position of being unable to act without creating permanent records that would be reviewed by every major power in the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Keth Moran governors debated among themselves. Their discussions were surprisingly sophisticated, focusing not just on immediate concerns, but on long-term implications for their relationship with the Empire and their obligations to their citizens. They are thinking like statesmen rather than revolutionaries, Dr. Chan observed as they monitored the negotiations. Is that good or bad for our purposes? Good. Statesmen seek sustainable solutions. Revolutionaries seek to overturn existing systems entirely. Finally, Governor Kethtar contacted the station with their decision. Your Highness, the Kethmoran Collective accepts your proposed terms. We formally withdraw our declaration of independence in exchange for autonomous administrative status within the Nexari Empire. Excellent. I will begin drafting the necessary legislation immediately. There is one additional request, which is, we would like Dr. Chun to serve as an independent mediator during the implementation process, if the Terran Colonial Authority would permit such assignment. Zarathel looked at Dr. Chun, who nodded slowly. I believe that could be arranged. The Kethmoran crisis resolution sent shockwaves throughout the Empire. Within days, similar requests for autonomous status came from 6 other Outer Rim systems. More surprisingly, the requests were reasonable, well-documented, and clearly designed to work within Imperial structures rather than replace them. It appears, Vextar observed, that most of our outer territories have legitimate concerns that have been ignored for decades. Then, perhaps it is time we stopped ignoring them, Zarathel replied. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Prince Flameheart requested a private audience, his massive form somehow managing to appear diminished when he arrived at the station alone rather than with his usual entourage of warriors. You have humiliated me, he said without preamble. I have demonstrated that there are alternatives to violence. My people do not understand alternatives to violence. Strength is the only language the Draconic Consortium respects. Then, perhaps you need to teach them new languages. Perhaps, he said quietly, I need to learn new languages myself. 6 months after the Kethmoran crisis, the Nexari Empire had undergone more fundamental changes than in the previous 50 years combined. 14 star systems had transitioned to autonomous administrative status. 3 new trade agreements had been negotiated with previously hostile neighbors, and the Imperial Senate had expanded to include direct representation from Outer Rim territories. Princess Zarathel stood in the same observation deck where she had watched countless suitors depart in frustration, but now she was reviewing reports from systems that were thriving under their new governmental arrangements. Economic output was up 17% across the autonomous regions. Civil unrest had virtually disappeared, and recruitment for Imperial service had actually increased as citizens felt more connected to the empire they served. The Andromedan Collective has requested a formal diplomatic mission, Chancellor Vextar reported, his tone suggesting he still found these developments surprising. They want to discuss implementing similar federal structures in their own territories. Based on our recent successes, it appears that other empires have been watching our reforms with considerable interest. Dr. Chan approached from the communication station, where he had been coordinating with Terran research teams studying the governmental transitions. Over the past 6 months, his role had evolved from observer to advisor to something approaching essential personnel. The Nexari Council had granted him permanent diplomatic status, and his insights had become integral to Imperial policy discussions. The quarterly reports are in, he said, handing Zarathel a data tablet. Productivity is up across all sectors. Administrative costs have decreased by 23%, and citizen satisfaction ratings are at historical highs. Any problems? Minor implementation issues in 3 systems, but nothing that cannot be resolved through established mediation processes. The federal model is proving remarkably adaptable. Zarathel smiled. My father was skeptical when I first proposed these changes. He thought I was undermining imperial authority by granting local autonomy. What does he think now? He is considering similar reforms for the core worlds. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Prince Flameheart emerged from the transport tube, but his appearance was dramatically different from his previous visits. Instead of elaborate ceremonial armor, he wore simple, practical clothing. His usual retinue of warriors was absent, replaced by a small group of what appeared to be advisors and technical specialists. "Your Highness," he said, offering a respectful bow that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. "I have come to make a formal request." "What kind of request?" "The Draconic Consortium wishes to petition for associate membership in the Nexary Federal Alliance." Zarathel blinked in surprise. The Nexary Federal Alliance was the new governmental structure that had evolved from the autonomous system reforms. It maintained the essential unity of the empire while allowing for local variation in implementation of imperial policies. But it had never included external powers. "Explain your reasoning," she said carefully. "The consortium has observed the prosperity and stability achieved through your federal model. Our traditional approaches have resulted in constant military conflicts with neighboring powers, enormous defense expenditures, and persistent civil unrest on conquered worlds." Flameheart paused, clearly uncomfortable with admitting such weaknesses. "We believe that joining a federal structure would provide better outcomes for our people than continued military expansion." Dr. Chin stepped forward. "Prince Flameheart, such a transition would require fundamental changes to draconic governmental philosophy. Are your people prepared for that level of reform?" "Some are. Others will require persuasion. But the evidence is overwhelming that federal cooperation produces better results than military domination." "What specific benefits do you hope to gain?" Zarathel asked. "Economic stability through participation in imperial trade networks. Reduced military expenditures through shared defense agreements. Access to advanced technologies through cooperative research programs." Flameheart hesitated, then continued more quietly. "And the opportunity to learn from species that have mastered the art of governance through cooperation rather than conquest." The implications were staggering. The Draconic Consortium controlled 8 star systems and commanded one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Their integration into the Federal Alliance would fundamentally shift the balance of power throughout the region. "This would require extensive negotiations," Vextar observed. "Draconic law and imperial law have very different foundations." "We are prepared for extensive negotiations," Flameheart said. "We have brought legal scholars, economic advisors, and policy specialists. We are committed to making this work." "Why the change?" Zarathel asked bluntly. 6 months ago, you were threatening to destroy the Kethmoran system rather than allow any challenge to traditional authority structures. Flameheart's expression grew thoughtful. "Because I have spent those 6 months watching the results of your approach versus the results of mine. Your reforms have created prosperity and loyalty. My traditional methods have produced fear and resentment. The contrast is illuminating. It also helps," Dr. Chan added quietly, "that the 3 systems bordering Draconic territory have all transitioned to the federal model. Prince Flameheart's options for traditional expansion have become significantly limited." "True," Flameheart admitted without embarrassment. "But even if expansion remained possible, I'm no longer convinced it would be desirable. Conquered territories require enormous resources to maintain. Allied territories contribute resources while maintaining themselves." Over the following weeks, the integration negotiations proved every bit as complex as predicted. Draconic concepts of honor and authority had to be reconciled with federal principles of representation and consent. Traditional draconic punishment systems based on ritualized combat had to be adapted to work within imperial legal frameworks. Most challenging of all, the deeply ingrained draconic belief that might made right had to evolve toward acceptance that legitimacy came from effectiveness rather than force. "It is like learning a new language," Flameheart confided during one particularly difficult session. "Not just the words, but the entire way of thinking. All significant growth requires learning new ways of thinking," Dr. Chin replied. "The question is whether the benefits justify the effort." "They do. I have seen what your federal systems accomplish. My people deserve those same opportunities." The breakthrough came when Dr. Chun suggested adapting draconic honor customs to support federal principles rather than replacing them entirely. Instead of ritual combat to resolve disputes, draconic representatives would engage in formal debates with established rules and victory conditions. Instead of demonstrating strength through conquest, they would demonstrate strength through successful collaboration and problem-solving. Honor through achievement rather than domination, Zarathel summarized during the final negotiation session. Exactly. The fundamental draconic values remain unchanged, but their expression evolves to support cooperation instead of conflict. The formal signing ceremony for the Draconic Integration Treaty took place 3 months later. Representatives from 17 star systems gathered on the orbital station to witness the expansion of the Nexary Federal Alliance into something unprecedented, a truly interspecies governmental federation based on mutual benefit rather than conquest or submission. This is the beginning of something extraordinary, Emperor Karathel declared in his formal address. He had arrived from the capital world to personally oversee the ceremony, and his pride in his daughter's achievements was evident. For the first time in galactic history, we have demonstrated that different species can maintain their unique identities while working together toward common goals. After the ceremony, as delegates celebrated and began planning the practical implementation of integration, Zarathel found herself alone with Dr. Chun on the observation deck, where they had first begun their serious conversations. "You realize," she said quietly, "that none of this would have been possible without your insights." "I provided perspective," he corrected. "You provided the courage to act on that perspective. That made all the difference." "Marcus," she said, using his given name for the first time, "I have a question that I have been wanting to ask for months." "What question?" "When you first came here, you said you were studying our courtship customs, but you never actually participated in any courtship activities. You never tried to impress me or demonstrate your worthiness according to traditional protocols." "That is correct." "Why not?" Dr. Chan was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars that now represented not just territories under Nexary control, but partners in an unprecedented interspecies alliance. "Because," he said finally, "I realized that the most impressive thing I could do was treat you as an intellectual equal rather than a prize to be won. And now I've spent 6 months working closely with the most brilliant governmental reformer in galactic history. I have watched you solve problems that have challenged empires for centuries. I have seen you transform fear-based authoritarianism into cooperation-based federalism." He turned to face her directly. "Now I know that my initial impression was correct, but insufficient." "Insufficient how?" "You are not just intellectually impressive. You are extraordinary in every way that matters. Your wisdom, your courage, your compassion, your ability to see solutions where others see only problems." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If I were to formally request your consideration as a potential partner, it would not be because I think I could offer you anything you need. It would be because I believe we could accomplish together what neither of us could achieve alone." Zarathel felt her heart rate accelerate. "And what would we accomplish together? We would build bridges between species that have never understood each other. We would develop governmental systems that actually serve the governed. We would explore the galaxy not as conquerors, but as partners with local populations." His eyes met hers. "We would prove that cooperation produces better outcomes than competition." "That is a compelling vision," she said softly. "Is it compelling enough to consider a formal partnership?" "Marcus Chun," she said, her 4 arms moving in the graceful gesture that indicated acceptance of a proposal. "I would be honored to build the future with you." Their first kiss was awkward, given the biological differences between their species, but it was also perfect in its symbolism. 2 beings from different worlds, different cultures, different evolutionary histories, learning to bridge those differences through patience, understanding, and mutual respect. "There will be challenges," she said when they separated. "Political challenges from those who oppose interspecies partnerships. Cultural challenges as we learn to navigate our different backgrounds. practical challenges in developing governmental systems for an increasingly diverse alliance. I would not want it any other way, Dr. Chen replied. The most worthwhile accomplishments are never easy, and our children will grow up in a galaxy where cooperation between species is normal rather than exceptional, where differences are seen as sources of strength rather than justifications for conflict, where the phrase interspecies alliance does not sound like a contradiction in terms. 1 year later, the wedding of Princess Zarathel and Dr. Marcus Chun was attended by representatives from 47 star systems across 3 galaxy sectors. The Nextry Federal Alliance had grown to include 12 different species. Economic prosperity had reached levels not seen in centuries, and requests for membership came from new systems almost weekly. But for Zarathel, the most important moment was not the elaborate ceremony or the political significance of the union. It was the quiet conversation she had with Marcus on the observation deck the night before the wedding, when he asked her the same question that had started their relationship. "What do you want in a partner?" "I want someone who challenges me to be better than I thought possible," she replied. "Someone who sees solutions where I see only problems. Someone who treats our differences as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to overcome." She smiled. "In other words, I want exactly what I found." The human had indeed proven different from all the other suitors. He had not tried to impress her with displays of strength or wealth. He had not offered her gifts or composed poetry in her honor. He had not challenged rivals to combat or demonstrated his worthiness through traditional protocols. Instead, he had listened to her ideas, challenged her assumptions, and helped her transform an empire through the radical notion that good government should serve the governed rather than the governors. And in doing so, he had won not just her hand in marriage, but her partnership in building a future that neither of them could have imagined alone. The galaxy was changing, one conversation at a time.